Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to our Thought Leader series, Engineering the Olympics, The Vision. My name is Stacey Rawlings from Engineers Australia and I will be your host for today. Firstly, in keeping with our tradition, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner Cardno. Cardno are a professional infrastructure and environmental services company with expertise in the development and improvement of physical and social infrastructure for communities around the world. The Cardno team is comprised of leading professionals who plan, design, manage and deliver sustainable projects and community programs. Their diverse skills and experience allow them to offer integrated services in 10 market sectors to clients both locally and across the globe. These sectors are buildings, land, coastal and ocean, environment, international development, management services, energy and resources, transportation, water and defence. Today we will hear from 3 speakers, followed by our live audience Q&A session, and I encourage you to send questions through to our speakers via the YouTube chat box during today's presentations. I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Aaron Broughton. Aaron Broughton is the Executive Director of Infrastructure and Precincts for the Brisbane 2032 Task Force. He is responsible for the progression of the master plan of venues and facilities for the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games and has enjoyed a successful career working in sport and recreation, health, water and residential infrastructure delivery. He has extensive government and program management experience, having previously worked in portfolios including sports stadia, health and water infrastructure, and has a deep passion for delivering quality community infrastructure. Aaron holds a Master's in Business Administration, Master's in Project Management and Bachelor of Commerce majoring in Sustainable Economics. Prior to entering government, he was an architectural draftsman working in Australia and the United Kingdom. Please welcome Aaron Broughton.
And thank you, Stacey, and thank you to Engineers Australia for the opportunity to come and speak about the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners upon the many lands upon which we meet today, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's tremendous that there's such interest from engineers all over Australia in the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. When I think about engineering the Olympics, the vision, a number of things certainly come to mind. It's about the opportunities and benefits for Brisbane and Queensland and for Australia. It's about the projects and the venues and the legacy that those venues are going to create. But it's also about the longer term legacy of the Games, not just during the Games, but also in the decade leading up to the Games and the decade beyond the Games. Let's now take a quick look at the Games, an overview of the Games itself. It began a long time ago. It began back in 2015. The SEQ mayors put together a feasibility study. The state then formed a task force, and in earlier this year, in February 2021, Brisbane was selected by the International Olympic Committee for targeted dialogue, effectively starting the bid process for Brisbane. The final response was created and sent to the IOC in May, and 21st of July 2021, a day that I'll certainly remember, and so will all of those people that were with us at the event at South Bank. On the 21st of July, Brisbane was awarded the 2032 Games. Australia will be only one of 3 countries in 2032. Australia will be one of 3 countries to have been awarded the Games 3 times, including the UK and the US. Not only that, but if you think about cities like Tokyo, like Paris, like Los Angeles, these are world cities. These are international world cities. They're also Olympic cities. And in 2032, we'll be adding Brisbane to that list, and Brisbane will then become, again, one of the international world Olympic cities alongside all of those other famous cities that have hosted the Games before. But we've got the Games, but now the hard work begins. This is an amazing opportunity for Queensland, and I'll speak about a number of things, the new norms and benefits for Queensland shortly. But we have an 11-year runway. We've got 11 years to get the venues right, to get the operational planning right, and we've got a lot more time than many other Olympics had in the past. If you think about Sydney and London, they had less than 8 years to put together their transformational Olympic parks. Now, we've got time. We've got time to get the venues right and to get the plans right. Not only that, but when you think about the opportunities, we also have opportunities for other major events and tourism. In addition to the Olympics, there'll be all sorts of pre-Olympics games, competition and training, and sports will want to come to Queensland and to Brisbane to test out our venues and to get to know Queensland in the lead up to the Olympic Games. While it's called Brisbane 2032, there are a lot of partners involved. It's the Queensland Government, it involves the Australian Government, Brisbane City Council, the Australian Olympic Committee, Paralympics Australia, but it's not just those Games partners. There's also 9 local councils that are involved that have venues. The Games will be across 3 states, including New South Wales and Victoria. There are 28 Olympic sports and 22 Paralympic sports that are all Games partners, are all part of this journey with us. This is going to be a joint effort. It's going to be a large, long effort over 11 years, but we're going to see it through. And we're going to see it through in part because of the benefits. Ron has spoken about these benefits, but a couple of quick ones. Queensland's total benefit will be $8.1 billion, 91,600 FTE job years, national benefit of $17.6 billion. That's huge benefits to social, economic and environment benefits to Australia. And that's why we've gone through this journey and why we've bid for the Games and we'll be putting on the Games. Now let's have a look at something that we're all interested in, is the master plan. This is the venues and facilities that'll be used for the Games. The venues were selected for the Games and they were heavily influenced by something called the new norms. The new norms is a change that the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, made for host cities. And the change is that instead of asking the city to change to fit the Olympics, the International Olympic Committee, as part of their Agenda 2022, now say fit the Olympics into the city. And that's why you'll see, as part of our candidature, part of our bid, we are going to be using 84% of existing or temporary venues. We're going to fit the Olympics into the city, into southeast Queensland. Something else which I find interesting is that the Gabba, we're going to be investing in the Gabba because we need that for the long-term growth of Queensland. But at 50,000 seats, it will be the smallest Olympic stadium since the Netherlands in 1928, about 31,000 seats. We're going to fit the Olympics into the venues and facilities that we need and want and have here in southeast Queensland. Now, the master plan is based on 3 zones. Again, we're not building for the Games. It's all about the legacy outcomes. We're building for the growth in southeast Queensland over 10 years. We're building because we need the venues, and we'll be fitting the Olympics into the city. 84% temporary or existing venues. There will be 22 competition venues in Brisbane, 6 competition venues on the Gold Coast, many of which we use for the Commonwealth Games, 4 venues on the Sunshine Coast, 3 regional venues, including Townsville, Toowoomba and Cairns, all for preliminary football, as well as preliminary football in Sydney and Melbourne. Interestingly, they were both Olympic cities as well and will be part of the Brisbane 2032 Olympics. Here we see the Brisbane zone. We've got 22 venues in Brisbane. Here are some of them, including things like venues that we know, like Lang Park, Ballymore, Victoria Park. There's the new Brisbane Indoor Arena. The R&A Showgrounds will be a venue for the Olympics. The Brisbane Indoor Sports Centre, a new facility. The Royal Queensland Golf Club out near the Gateway Bridge will be the home of golf. We're also going to be hosting the main press centre and international broadcasting centres at Southbank, close to the heart of the action, close to the city. Also, the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre will be a hive of activity with a number of sports, both Olympic and Paralympic, being held there. Also, just off the picture on the right, you've got the Gabba, which will be the home of the opening and closing ceremonies, as well as Olympic track and field events. You can see there also we've got the Athlete Village. The main Athlete Village will be at North Shore Hamilton. This is a planned, existing and planned development, again, fitting the Olympics into the plans for the city. It will have 10,700 beds during the Olympics for athletes and officials, and about 5,600 during the Paralympic Games. If we move on to the Gold Coast, on the Gold Coast we have 6 venues, including the Gold Coast Convention Centre, the temporary facilities of the Broadwater Parklands and Broadwater Park. We've got the Coomera Indoor Sports Centre, Gold Coast Sports and Leisure Centre, the Gold Coast Stadium, and of course many of these venues were front and centre for the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast. We're also housing some athletes down the Gold Coast at a secondary village, which will be located in Robina. Again, this is an existing and planned development in Robina. On the Sunshine Coast, we have 4 venues. The Sunshine Coast Stadium, an existing facility, although we're going to be upgrading it. We've got a new indoor sports centre going in to the Sunshine Coast, the Sunshine Coast Mountain Bike Centre, and the road events will be held at a temporary venue to be built right there on Alexandra Headlands. And the images of the road events, the cycling and the marathons, will be amazing and will really showcase Queensland and the Sunshine Coast to the world. As far as from a regional perspective, we've got those 3 regional venues, Barlow Park in Cairns, North Queensland Stadium in Townsville, and Toowoomba Sports Ground in Toowoomba. As part of the master plan, we have 6 new competition venues that the government is committed to as part of the master plan. We've got 4 indoor sports centres. We've got the Brisbane Arena, and we've also got the Redland Whitewater Centre. The Brisbane Arena is planned for Roma Street, right above the Cross River Rail, right next to the Cross River Rail station. This is probably the most well-connected piece of real estate in the state. You've got heavy rail, you've got local rail, you've got intercity rail, there's bus, intercity bus, you've got the Cross River Rail as well, but it's also walking distance to the CBD. From an engineering perspective, it is going to be a challenge, that's for sure. We are going to be building over a number of rail corridors, but we're up for the task, and it will be an amazing venue. The venue will be a 17,000 seat venue in legacy mode, and during the games we're going to put in a temporary drop-in pool, and there'll be 15,000 seats available for spectators during the games. And we've done that because swimming is such an important sport to Queensland. We do very well in swimming, and a lot of people are going to want to be there, and so that's why we're going to drop a temporary pool inside what will then be the largest indoor venue in Brisbane. The Brisbane Indoor Sports Centre is a new venue at Albion. This will be based on the very successful model used in the Coomera and Carrara sports centres on the Gold Coast that we use for the Commonwealth Games. Those 2 centres have a massive legacy outcome for community sport, with hundreds of thousands of people using both of those facilities every year. As I said earlier, we've got 4 of those that we're putting in prior to 2032. This particular indoor sports centre will be approximately 12 basketball courts in size, and it will hold 12,000 people during the games in temporary seating. And in legacy mode, it'll be used for community sport and potential for para high-performance sport as well. Moreton and Chandler Indoor Sports Centres, we see here, again, are both based on the successful Coomera-Carrara community sport model. And we'll be building these because of the growing interest and growth in indoor sports across southeast Queensland. The Moreton facility will be 7,000 seat capacity during the games and will be our venue for boxing. It'll be approximately 9 basketball courts in size, whilst Chandler is an indoor sports centre that'll be part of a larger upgrade of the entire Chandler Sleeman facility. Now, the Chandler was built for the 1982 Commonwealth Games, and Chandler will host gymnastics here in this indoor sports centre, but it will also be the site for BMX track racing, cycling in the Anna Meares Velodrome, and a number of swimming events. The indoor sports centre will have 10,000 seats and approximately will be the size of approximately 12 basketball courts. It will also be used for gymnastics as a legacy outcome post the Games. Here we see the Redland Whitewater Centre, the 5th new facility to be built prior to the Games. Redland's, this is an exciting project that will have lasting legacy outcomes for community, for high performance sport, as well as creating a training facility for swift water rescue and our emergency services. They currently go interstate to undertake that training, but we'll have that capability here in Queensland. Also, this facility will be part of a broader development in the Birkdale Precinct that's being planned for the site now. The Sunshine Coast Indoor Sports Centre, another community sports facility, will be approximately 11 courts in size and will be used for basketball preliminaries for the Olympics. Basketball is huge on the Sunshine Coast, and this is going to be an amazing legacy for the city post the Games. We've got a range of upgrades as well, not only the new venues, but 8 upgrades of venues that are planned for South East Queensland and beyond prior to Brisbane 2032, well prior to Brisbane 2032. These include the Gabba, and I'll talk a bit more about that, Chandler and shooting at at Belmont. We've got the Wyaralong rowing in the Scenic Rim. This will be a great base for rowing in Queensland. We've got an upgrade to the Sunshine Coast Stadium, additional seating and upgrade, and the Sunshine Coast Stadium was recently heavily used by Rugby League and Rugby Union when most of that competition was held up here in Queensland. We've got an upgrade to the Sunshine Coast Mountain Bike Centre, as well as upgrades to both the Toowoomba Sports Ground and Barlow Park in Cairns. These upgrades will be upgrades to important regional stadiums and will facilitate the growth of those cities over the coming decades. Let's have a quick look at the Gabba. Now, the Gabba is an upgrade project because it's an existing venue, but it will become an amazing transformed venue well before the Games. Planned for construction between the Ashes of 2025 to 29. It will be used well before the Games, particularly by cricket and AFL, and it will create an outstanding legacy for cricket and AFL, and will help Queensland and Brisbane get back into a competitive place when we come to looking at international and national cricket and AFL games. This site, the Gabba, will be extremely well connected. We've got Cross River Rail going in across Mains Road. You've got the Brisbane Metro. You've also got pedestrian activity and pedestrian projects going in and around the area, including the Kangaroo Green Bridge. This will be, as I said, a 50,000 seat capacity, and it's going to have a direct pretty much line of sight straight from the Cross River Rail station all the way to the Gabba, and that will be an amazing experience to walk out of the station to see the Gabba, the Olympic Stadium in front of you, and it'll be one of those images of the Games. Now, when we look at legacy, again, I said that the whole enterprise, the whole reason that we went for a bid for the Games was to create a lasting legacy. And when you think about legacy, there's a whole range of elements to it. There there's the people, there are the places, some of which we've spoken about. There's the sporting outcomes, there's the legacy for the economy, those huge benefits that Ron spoke about. There's the social benefits as well as significant environmental benefits. But legacy is not just about after the games. Legacy is before, during and after the games. We have an opportunity for a 10+10 legacy, 10 years before the games, 10 years after the games. And this shows some of the activities that will be happening in the days of the games, in the weeks leading up to, and the months and the years, and also those legacy outcomes over the 2 decades, 10 years before and 10 years after. There's a lot going on in the background planning for this legacy, because it's such an important part of the Olympics and why Brisbane, Queensland and Australia put in a proposal for the Games. Sporting and events are another legacy, another opportunity for Brisbane and Queensland. In addition to the legacy opportunities, we've got the opportunity to attract other national and international competition and training to Queensland. We already have world-class facilities in southeast Queensland, but also in regional Queensland. And importantly, there's a real opportunity to attract into Queensland training opportunities into regional Queensland. And this is an exciting opportunity for regional Queensland and something that we'll be certainly focusing on. In regard to elite sport, the Olympics in Brisbane in 2032 will spur amazing efforts and opportunities for elite athletes. And we'll be looking to find the next Logan Martin, who is an Olympic BMX athlete, Taliqua Clancy, a volleyball athlete from Queensland, Carney Liddell, who's a Paralympic swimmer, Kathy Freeman, people like Susie O'Neill or Ash Barty. There's going to be a huge push on to find those kids that are in school today that will be our next Olympic athletes. And the Olympics will be a lightning rod to develop elite sport in Queensland. There's a lot to do. The next steps, there's lots of them. We're currently working on establishing the Organising Committee for the Olympic Games, otherwise known as OCOG. Legislation is anticipated into the Queensland Parliament later this year. We're also working on with a range of partners, including all of the local councils and the federal government, on planning for broader games government. Also working with the federal government on the 50-50 funding arrangement the federal government committed to for critical infrastructure. Also, we're working with asset owners and delivery partners to plan the new and upgraded facilities. Thanks very much again to Engineers Australia for the opportunity to present here today. Thank you to my fellow speakers today. Thank you for participating and taking an interest in the Brisbane 2032 Olympics and Paralympics Games. For more information, if you're interested in more information, the Queensland Government website includes a whole range of information, including our submission or bid to the Olympics, the IOC, the Olympic Committee. Also, there's a video that shows all the venues that we'll be using. And also, if you're interested in getting involved, there is a Buy Queensland page on the Business Queensland website. And this will provide the latest updates as we move through the design and delivery of these projects and indeed the games. And also there's a section there to help organisations and business become tender ready. Thanks very much again. I hope that was informative and I hope that was useful. Thanks again.
Thank you, Aaron, for your insights. I'd like to now welcome our second speaker for today, Ron Zubrick. Ron is the National Lead Partner of KPMG's Sport, Major Venues and Events Practice. He has significant experience in the sport and recreation sector, where he has partnered with government and sporting organisations at all levels across Australia to deliver better sporting infrastructure outcomes. Ron was also lead partner for the Queensland Government's 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games Economic and Social Benefits Assessment Report that underpinned the state's Games bid. Please welcome Ron Zubrick.
Hello everyone, as Stacey mentioned, my name is Ron Zubrick. I'm the National Lead Partner for Sports Major Venues and Events at KPMG, but also had the privilege to be the lead partner for the preliminary economic, social and environmental analysis for the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Before I jump into the details of the outcomes of the work, I will share the broader journey with you and explain why the 2032 Games will be different to all prior games and why we should all refrain from undertaking direct comparisons of the 2032 Games to all past games. As part of its Olympic Agenda 2020, the International Olympic Committee established a new approach for reviewing and selecting future hosts. The IOC identified that public confidence in the Olympic movement was being eroded, and as a result, there were challenges with the bidding process. Bidding cities were facing significant costs. There were significant reputational challenges around ethical and corruption risks that from time to time were raised, and it engendered very high expectations. So in 2014, the International Olympic Committee introduced Agenda 2020 to reshape the bidding and the future delivery of Olympic Games, focusing on flexibility and contextualization, importantly, sustainability and legacy, and lastly, partnership and cost efficiency. In very simple terms, what the IOC is trying to achieve is that future Olympic Games are delivered in the most sustainable way. And so when we look at the journey that Queensland has been on, against the backdrop of Agenda 2020, the Southeast Queensland Council of Mayors conducted a preliminary investigation into the potential hosting of an Olympic Games in Queensland. That work actually was done all the way back in 2015 and sort of triggered the initial thinking in relation to a future bid for the Games. On the back of the success of the delivery of the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games in 2018, the Council of Mayors in early 2019 released a study in support of hosting the Games. The state government subsequently established what was called the 2032 Task Force, and as part of its broader planning, commissioned KPMG to conduct a preliminary economic and social benefits analysis, which we at the time delivered in partnership with the University of Queensland. Some of the findings from the study informed elements of the Queensland Government's value proposition assessment and its formal announcement that it will be pursuing a bid for the 2032 Games. In early 2020, the value proposition assessment and the Games master plan were presented to the IOC. A quick overview of the value proposition assessment, because it's an important document as it highlights why the Queensland Government and its Games partners elected to pursue the Games. It is based on 5 underpinning guiding principles and informed the balance of the work of the Queensland Government and its partners, but also KPMG's work as part of this process. Guiding principles were first and foremost that the Games must be legacy-led, and that there's 3 overarching legacy themes that are to be driven. These included prosperity, and examples here were suggesting job creation, tourism opportunities, trade opportunities, skills development, amongst others. Participation, aspiring to have a healthier and more inclusive society, and the same applying to our broader communities. Planning, drawing on the Queensland lifestyle, enhancing the Queensland lifestyle, and making livability a competitive advantage for the state. That is a short summary of some of those legacies, and I encourage you all to have a read of the value proposition assessment. The other guiding principles was that the Games need to present 2 decades of opportunities. 10 years before the Games and 10 years after the Games, and I will come back to that shortly. The Games also need to be inclusive of all Queenslanders. It needs to be delivered in a fiscally responsible way, linking back to the Agenda 2020 objective of the IOC around the sustainability of future Games. And lastly, a partnership of the 3 levels of government: local government, state government, and Commonwealth government for these particular Games. We go back to the journey. As the bid progressed, the external environment was subject to significant change due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. That triggered a need for the KPMG analysis to be updated and expanded once Brisbane was announced as the preferred bidder and entered into a targeted dialogue with the International Olympic Committee, which was back in February 2021. The Epinby was commissioned at that point to update its previous work to reflect Covert, but also include additional analyses where time permitted to do so. We then had the privilege to support the Queensland Government and its Games partners to pitch the work and what we call the economics of the Games to the International Olympic Committee. And the rest is history. We've been successful with the bid, and that was announced just prior to the start of the Tokyo Games, as you all know. What are the potential benefits of the 2032 Games? Before I delve immediately into the findings of our analysis, I just wanted to highlight a few overarching aspects that are important to consider. The analysis was undertaken through a high-level cost-benefit analysis framework, which means that it was focused on the overall welfare gains to society, covering economic, social, and environmental benefits. Importantly, it's an incremental analysis. As such, infrastructure and programs that would have been delivered under a base case are not included in our analysis. And this is important in the context of these games in that 84% of the infrastructure requirements have been identified to be existing or of temporary nature. And again, that is important because it links back to the objectives of Agenda 2020 and the desire for future games to be more sustainable. It also means that we've excluded transport projects from our analysis, as our analysis concluded, and the International Olympic Committee strongly held the view that these projects are assumed to have proceeded regardless, albeit maybe likely at a later point in time. We're not building this type of infrastructure for the Olympics per se. We would build it regardless to deal with population growth and broader economic growth in Southeast Queensland. And as such, it was not deemed to be infrastructure specifically developed for the Games. Lastly, and as I mentioned earlier, the analysis considers a 20-year period, 10 years before the Games and 10 years after the Games. Our key findings include economic benefits. The quantifiable economic and social benefits are estimated to be 8.1 billion for Queensland and 17.6 billion for Australia. The estimated impact of new expenditures resulting from the Games, and by that we mean induced tourism and trade, events, operations and infrastructure, is projected to result in the creation of approximately 122,900 FTE job years on the national level, and on the Queensland level, the number was estimated to be 91,600 job years over the 20-year evaluation period that I mentioned earlier. Economic benefits resulting from a Games uplift in international tourism and trade are estimated to be in the order of 4.6 billion, with an estimated 8.5 billion in benefits at the national level. Importantly, though, in addition to the economic benefits, we also considered long-term quantifiable and non-quantifiable social benefits that are anticipated to be significant contributors to the success of the Games. Quantifiable social benefits were estimated to be in the order of 3.5 billion for Queensland, 9.1 billion on a national level. What are these quantified social benefits? Firstly, we quantified resident benefits. We described them as the intangible benefits to residents of a host city or country associated with legacy, community spirit, prestige, and civic pride associated with hosting the Games. There is no market mechanism to capture the quantum of these benefits. However, numerous studies have been conducted, particularly around Olympic Games, that have sought to quantify the value using non-market methodologies, such as estimating willingness to pay through the contingent valuation method or through the estimation of subjective well-being. Considering the time constraints to develop the analysis that the International Olympic Committee wanted, a bespoke study in that regard wasn't done for the 2032 Games yet. Instead, the outcomes were derived from past Games and with some adjustment made to reflect the different nature of the Brisbane Games. The next important social benefit is health benefits. Benefits resulting from leveraging the 2032 Games to increase participation in physical activity across Queensland and the nation, including lowering the risk of chronic diseases, improving mental health outcomes, and enhancing productivity for all Queenslanders and Australians. And the last quantified social benefit was volunteering benefits, benefits accruing to volunteers themselves, such as self-improvement and altruistic value, and the benefits that accrue to the broader community, such as the increased likelihood for future volunteering post the Games, or the direct benefits of the activities undertaken by volunteers in support of the Games itself. In addition of the quantified social benefits, a number of other social benefits were considered on a qualitative basis. By optimizing and aligning state government policy settings in relation to these impacts, social benefits can be created over the medium to long term, and they can include civic pride and social cohesion, and by that we mean enhancing community spirit and cohesion to increase well-being and support for the Games. Civic pride and social cohesion for residents is one of the most positive social impacts of hosting a 2032 Games. Olympic Games have been found to have a very positive relationship with residents' level of civic pride in the host city, but also non-host cities and more broadly across the country. Research drawing on research from the Beijing Olympics, the Atlanta Olympics and the Sydney Olympics, as well as a range of FIFA World Cups, we identified that there is fairly strong evidence in relation to enhanced community spirit, community cohesion and belonging, local values, pride and perceived quality of life. And these are all achieved following the delivery of these types of major events. Another important social benefit is the enhancement of elite sporting pathways, providing our athletes, emerging athletes with world-class training facilities and coaching locally to create the environment for high performance. The achievement by those athletes are critically important, even in games leading up to the Brisbane Games, because they often inspire younger generations to engage in physical activity, linking back to some of the health benefits that I mentioned earlier. Games of this nature also provide the opportunity for partnerships with industry and governments. Industry and governments working together locally and globally to deliver on shared objectives, fast-track investment, and facilitate economic growth. Hosting events such as the 2032 Games may lead to increased networks and connections globally for government, for business, residents, and non-host regions, provided that entities share common values and an aligned purpose. What does that look like in practice? It can translate into new trade deals, business venture ecosystems and alliances, innovation, together with strengthened international relationships and increased levels of soft power and diplomacy. These are all impacts which may result from hosting the 2032 Games. And the last dimension I want to call out is diversity and inclusion, investing early to bring together diverse groups and create an inclusive experience for all. And as part of that, also building upon the state government's reconciliation efforts with First Nation communities. In all honesty, we would have liked to quantify some of these benefits to further sort of integrate them into the analysis. But on balance, when we looked at the evidence base in relation to some of the non-quantified social benefits, it was not deemed to be robust enough to allow us to put sort of hand on our heart and say we can include them because there is rigor around past assessment in relation to such benefits. But I do believe that over time this will evolve, and particularly in relation to the Brisbane Olympic Games, if the data that we have available today, and if we know that there are gaps around the measurement of some of these impacts, then there's a material opportunity here for the Games partners, the Queensland Government and its partner entities, to engage with academic institutions that are well experienced and qualified to lead the charge, to put longitudinal studies in place to allow us to measure some of these benefits and be the first Games to be able to report back of what the true impact in relation to some of these social benefits may have been. The last dimension that we briefly looked at was environmental benefits. It's acknowledged that mega events such as the Olympic and Paralympic Games have traditionally come with a significant environmental footprint. However, the Queensland Government and its Games partners are proposing to minimise and mitigate against environmental impacts and deliver against the climate positive commitments required to host the 2032 Games. And some of the initiatives that we called out in our summary report were repurposing and upgrading existing infrastructure. Where possible, reusing and repurposing infrastructure that is already available to us. And as I mentioned earlier, the target here is to utilize 84% of the infrastructure that will be utilized as existing or temporary. So we will upgrade existing assets where needed, but in that process, we'll utilize recycled materials and lower carbon options to support Queensland Government's 30% target in reduction in emissions by 2030. Games of this nature can also drive behavioural change, building on Queensland's environmental credentials and policies in recycling, waste and hydrogen to overcome short-term environmental impacts, such as, for example, transport congestion, and creating long-term behavioural change by leveraging sport as a social influencer. In relation to pollution and waste management incentives, we highlighted that there could be a focus on reducing, reusing and recycling incentives and behaviours to limit waste, litter and pollution in the lead up to, during and post the event. And transport planning, greater use of public transport, detailed transport planning and co-location of events to minimise congestion and emissions during the Games. Quantification of the environmental impacts in an economic sense, by that I mean in monetary terms, was not achievable within the scope and timeframe of this project, but also was not at the time a key requirement of the International Olympic Committee to be integrated into this report. So that gives you sort of a summary overview of the journey that we've been on and the Queensland Government has been on, but also some of the observations and findings in our report. Now, I've made a number of these presentations over the last few weeks and months, and regularly get asked how I personally believe the report was received in the public domain. Look, my view is that those in support of Olympic Games gave a lot of kudos to the Queensland Government and KPMG and also the Games partners, specifically for the focus of social benefits of the Games. The International Olympic Committee in particular, in our pitch of what we call the economics of the Games, highlighted the extent of the analysis as it relates to the social impacts that the Games may deliver. And probably, I would suggest, is probably one of the most rigorous analyses in relation to major events and the social impacts that has ever been done. Now, that might not all be visible to you, but it certainly is been done in a very extensive and large report, hundreds of pages long, that was submitted to the International Olympic Committee. However, when you go after social benefits and you try to attempt to quantify something that hasn't been done before, that is where the naysayers will focus. And whilst the media overall was very positive, there were a couple of articles that were negative, and they focused exactly on these benefits and described them as sort of the fluffy benefits, and those that you use to just maybe include to make up some numbers. I disagree with that. I do consider we put our brand against a report that I still consider conservative. I'll give you one example, and that relates to health benefits. The underpinning assumption in relation to some of the quantification of our health benefits in our report assumes that the physical activity levels in Queensland, which are at the moment one of the lowest in the country, will increase to the current Australian average. We didn't assume world leading. We didn't assume nation leading. We simply assumed that Queensland will move from its current level to the Australian average. And I think that a Games like that will hopefully allow us to achieve better than that. And I'm sure the Games partners will aspire to do better than that, to ensure we have the societal outcomes that we all desire to achieve. And probably the last point I want to make is that we have very limited time to conduct this analysis, and as such, we created themes and clusters of benefits, but there are significantly more specific benefits that can be targeted and achieved at a more granular level. That's where the establishment of a robust benefits realisation framework will be important, particularly in light of the fact that the Games were always envisaged to be legacy-led, as I sort of outlined at the outset. It will also be important to measure and quantify these benefits, as I said earlier, as too often the focus goes on the cost side of the equation because it's easier to measure. But most of the past Olympic Games really missed the opportunity to monitor and measure the benefits derived. And in my view, you can't just look at one side of the ledger. We need to look and we need to track, monitor, and measure both. As I said at the outset, it has been an absolute privilege to have contributed to the bid over the last few years, and I truly believe that Queensland has an opportunity to deliver a Games in 2032 unlike anything we've seen before. The IOC wants it to be a Games unlike anything that has been delivered before, showcasing that Games can be delivered in a sustainable way. It will most certainly be a catalyst for the biggest transformation that South East Queensland has ever seen, and I mean a catalyst in a sense, or in an economic sense, in an infrastructure development sense, but also from a social and health perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron, for your insights. I'd like to now welcome our third speaker, Robbie Marshall. Robbie Marshall has over 26 years' experience in engineering in the urban development space in various technical, project management and leadership roles. He has played a key role in the design and delivery of major projects for both public and private sectors, helping to shape the communities in which we live and work, focusing on sustainable, community-focused and connected infrastructure that not only meets today's needs but tomorrow's as well. In his current role of General Manager, North West Australia, Robbie leads Cardno's operations in Queensland, Northern Territory and Western Australia, as their collaborative network of multidisciplinary engineering and environmental professionals make a difference to the communities in which they live and work through the delivery of pragmatic yet innovative solutions for infrastructure projects. Robbie's consultative approach, experience and industry knowledge led to his appointment in 2016 as the Senior Technical Advisor for State Government City Shaping Projects. He is also a member of the Brisbane 2033 Olympics and Paralympics Legacy Task Force, developing and advocating for policy initiatives and infrastructure projects. Please welcome Robbie Marshall.
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you for the opportunity and Institute Engineers today. And welcome everyone for the opportunity for myself to share my thoughts on what the Olympic Games means to ourselves and our profession in the education. So what I'll talk to you about today is the opportunity, see life cycles of design, the engineering demand coming out of this opportunity. I guess how we all need to think of innovation and digital and the need to think differently, not just offer the norm. The importance of the regions and a terminology that we've been using for some time as a community, and that's basically what gets out of having like the Olympic Games. What's the legacy that it leaves? Then I'll move into the sustainability of the Games and a final wrap-up. The opportunity. The third from KPMG, the Olympic Games will inject $8.1 million into the Queensland economy. It'll create jobs, and the jobs will be for engineers. It'll be create tourism. Again, there'll be engineers required for that. And it'll create trade. Again, something that the engineers can offer. It's really important, and this is my opinion and others, that hosting the Games is not about a 4-week event and in sport. It's much greater than that. The Olympic Games creates an opportunity to shape the city and the proposition of what it could look like moving forward. The opportunities and the visions. So I thought it was quite interesting to reflect on a couple of bodies, one being Brisbane City Council, their vision for Brisbane to be a healthier, more active, smarter, inclusive and accessible city perfectly aligned with the Olympic ideals. Committee of Brisbane, another committee that I'm active in, by 2033 post-Games, South East Queensland will be a region of international renown, proudly recognised for celebration of its rich, ancient cultures and its contemporary creativity. It will have a thriving, sustainable and adaptive economy anchored by warm, open and inclusive community. So what's all that mean to us as engineers? Pulling out some common themes. We need to be smarter. We need to have an inclusive engagement. We need to be accessible. What I'll talk about shortly is this Games will really draw on it a lot of existing assets. So the opportunity of really connecting all that. We need to continue to build our cities and communities. And as engineers, and again, something we've all experienced in COVID, we need to continue to be adaptable. The opportunity, most of you would have seen by now, the opportunity of the Olympics is, yes, it's South East Queensland focused, but it actually spreads across South East Queensland linearly, and it has 3 Games villages. So you've got your hub in Brisbane City. You've then got Gold Coast, which was the 2018 Commonwealth Games. And you've got Sunshine Coast as well. Being quite linear, the success of the Games will be how we connect it. Games Master Plan, and I touched on this briefly, this game and the bid from the Queensland Government was all about using existing facilities. You can see that 56% of the events will be in Brisbane. 84% of the venues are existing. So there'll be a lot of bump-in work. Again, it's how will people move around to these facilities. Sports will be held predominantly in Brisbane CBD. Be home for 11 of the 18 Paralympians, and it will also be home for the bigger part of the village. a bit of an image. You can get this on the internet, but this really shows graphically the existing facilities across Brisbane, those that need upgrading, those that need new facilities, and then temporary bump-in works. Again, if you look at this from an event management point of view, it's about how we're going to be moving people, vehicles, and all support crews around the Brisbane CBD on this 4-week event. So now I'll talk to you about life cycles of design and what my personal opinion is, where's the engineering demand going to come? So my experience is predominantly in large-scale master plan developments, but I was also the project director of the Commonwealth Games Village Parklands 2018 event. What that learned, and I guess my lessons learned out of that, is there's actually sort of 4 life cycles when you're designing for Olympic Games. There's the pre-games, the planning, getting things there. All the facilities need to be handed over 18 months, 2 years before the actual games commence or the opening ceremony. Then you've got games mode, which is really, again, around connection, ensuring safety and people are moving around. More importantly, as engineers and as community builders, it's what legacy does this major event leave for Brisbane, Queensland and Australia. So this is a bit of a graph which I've drawn up based on experience. And what it looks at is we've touched on the estimated boost to the economy of being $8.1 billion. Yes, there's going to be capital investment, but what does that mean to when is the engineering work going to start and when is it going to peak and when will it tail off? So this plan basically shows that pretty much over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, it's really going to be around planning, policy and framework. You then get into a period where you start getting to pre-games delivery, essential infrastructure in social and physical environments. And then you've got a 2-year period where you've got to have your bump-in mode, where security comes in, the Olympic Committee. And basically what I'm saying is we need to have most of this done by 2030. Little image on the right is, as engineers, we're generally driven on our projects by cost. And Olympic Games and any type of major event like this, it's all around time pressure. So what you'll find is we really need to get through the planning policy framework very quickly. We need to get it right. We then need to procure the contractors and the contract arrangement to build the villages and other infrastructure, and we need to move forward. My guesstimate, and again, as purely my thumbsuck, is that around that sort of 2026, 2029 is where we're going to be peaking as a sector, as engineers. So innovation, digital, and the need to think differently. And I think we do this as a profession, but this opportunity and catalyst for Brisbane really creates, puts a ball in our court to really sort of drive a legacy and shape our community moving forward. There's been a lot of work and there's a lot of commentary on the need for digital, and fair to say that we need to keep on pushing in that area. Every year that we move on, things are getting closer to digital. We're now building off models. 20 years ago, we're still on drawing boards. Now we're into virtual reality. Really need to push the opportunities in the engineering sector that we really push the envelope in digital for this type of project and opportunity. So I thought I'd share, I guess, a little bit of thinking differently through a case study. And really this will sort of articulate, I guess, what can be achieved for the community as a legacy. It also gives you a feel of the timeline and the long run-up that you need to take to create the opportunity that comes out of something like the Olympic Games. So I thought I'd share with you the Parklets Village. And again, said earlier that I was project director and I was engaged and worked on this project pretty much from 2013 to hand over to Gold Dock and completion. So the long run up, the project really started before 2011. That was the Commonwealth Games bid. So that was successful. We then went through a process where the state government and Economic Development Queensland at the time went to market with a reference design in 2013. The Parklands project was awarded to the Grocon consortium in 2015. We were part of that consortium. And we handed over the project in very, very early 2017 to EDQ for Goldock to bump in for the Commonwealth Games to occur in 2018. So key facts about this project. It was building 1,252 apartments. It had to be home for 6,000 people for the event of 12 days. So, it's a significant investment for an event for 12 days. And the construction bill was $550 million. The area in the yellow gives context of where the village sits in relation to Gold Coast and the real opportunity of creating something special in this location. So one thing when these projects come along, you really get a great opportunity to work with great people. And I had exposure to an architect of Peter Edwards at Archipelago, who I do a lot of work with today. And he, with the network of architects, came up with this vision. So the Parklands land, it was basically in the middle of the university, and it was in the middle of secondary high school. On the fringe, on the western fringe, there was investment of the new Gold Coast Hospital. So Peter and we came up with a vision of basically creating a heart of the project. And the heart of the project is where the waterfall is and where people in the community come and are attracted to on weekends. The pink arms were all about engaging and pulling the education from one side and then the health. So pulling it all together. And that really became our urban master plan. Image on the right is the completion. The arbor, what looks like the yellow roller coaster, is the heart. And then the bottom right-hand corner is a micro issue of when you're thinking differently, it shows a floor plate of the apartments in game mode. And then basically we had to put up a couple of walls, and then we went to legacy mode, for which now it's active leasing for students, nurses in the local community. Bit of context, that's the plan with a bit of overlay of aerial. And what we managed to achieve is not just a village, we managed to achieve the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct, which encompasses 200 hectares. So again, it's thinking bigger. It's thinking bigger than just this opportunity in front of us. It's what's the next 20 and 50 years beyond. So what do we achieve out of creating this? As I said, we achieved the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct. It's still under development today. We master planned 15 development sites, and we've got 85% of the area within 5 minutes of the light rail. So again, connection. And we achieved through the planning code a 6 to 8 story building height. Moving on to regional importance and community dividend. Again, this image here really shows the heart and the arbor that I was talking about before. Regional importance. Regional Queensland is part of our fabric. Now, whilst the game that we touched on is the majority of it is in southeast Queensland, there'll be events in North Queensland in Cairns, Townsville, as well as in the west in Toowoomba and Springfield. As an industry, we've got to come together to ensure that Queensland's share in the success of the Games. It's not just SEQ, it's Queensland. We need to continue to collaborate. One thing we've all learned in the last 18 months with COVID is we don't need to be working in the office together. There's no reason why someone in Darwin can't be doing the traffic study for a road in an event overlay for the Games. So what I urge our profession is to keep on thinking of collaborating and creating opportunities for everyone out of this event in SEQ. Another example of a community dividend is, again, referencing, I guess, the Gold Coast example with the Commonwealth Games. And again, investment of the state government. This is a facility, it's a Coomera Indoor Sports Centre. It's a $40 million build, but essentially this became an events hub for the Commonwealth Games. But what it did, it created a bit of social infrastructure in an emerging satellite growth area of Coomera. So that area, for those that don't know Gold Coast well, is really right next to Dreamworld and the theme parks in southeast Queensland. So again, there was an event here for the Commonwealth Games. This facility is now activated pretty much every day, whether it's indoor netball, indoor soccer, cricket, even events are planned from international. So it's a great way of taking an investment at a state level, and then the community dividend and the legacy goes on for years and years beyond. Sustainability. So as part of the bid, the government is required to deliver a climate positive Olympic Games. They've come up with 5 focus areas, and these are infrastructure and natural sites, again, engineering, resourcing and source management, mobility, again, engineering. The mobility is going to be a huge issue and a huge lift for us as a profession. Workforce, human rights and diversity, again, the diversity level. The more different types of thinking we offer, the more innovative we can be. And then climate. So in summary and wrap up, for our profession, it's a great time and a fantastic time to be an engineer. We can drive outcomes of infrastructure that we build today through this Catalyst project for legacy years to become. Through these actions and through these outcomes, and if you look at the visions that I touched on earlier, we can deliver a smarter, accessible, adaptable, and inclusive community. And finally, we can make a difference to the communities that we live and operate in. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Robbie, for your insights, and to all the speakers before, to Ron and to Aaron. I think that's been a great overview of where things are at now with this project, with the many years we have to go. So we're now going to bring all the speakers together and start trying to answer some of the many questions that have come through both in the registration process and online. But we'll get started with these questions. And just a quick reminder, if you are putting them into the live chat box, please do try and address who you would prefer the question to go to. So address it to either Robbie, Ron or Aaron, and we'll attempt to get to those. But to get us started, we're going to start with a question for Aaron. So Aaron, can you please give us a bit of your opinion on how best practice from past Olympics is being sourced and adopted? That question is from Matthias in Western Australia.
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you, Matthias. There's certainly lots of questions coming through. I think when you think about best practice and how do we make sure that is folded into the Olympics, into not only the venues that we're going to have, but also the operations of the Olympics, there's a couple of things come to mind. Both Ron and I spoke about the new norms, the Agenda 2020, the IOC. The IOC really have changed the way that they ask cities and regions to express their interest in the Games. And what that does is really changes the paradigm around fitting the Games into the city, as opposed to changing the city to fit the Games. In the conversations that we had with the IOC and the Future Host Commission, they were very clear that they didn't want venues just for the Olympics. And that's one of the lessons that has been learned from previous Games. And again, that's why we've got 84% of existing or temporary venues. But there are a number of other ways in which those lessons and best practice can be folded into the Olympics. The IOC itself has got a tremendous experience in the Olympics, and they have a process called knowledge transfer. We're at the beginning of that stage where they work with us to provide information to the city about operating the games, and there will be lessons learned across a whole range of different aspects of the games. But not only that, we've got some great, amazing local talent here, from engineers, architects, designers, construction firms. We've got international experience, but also we've got experience within the Queensland government. We've got experience in stadium delivery, North Queensland Stadium, and a lot of sports infrastructure and experience there. We're certainly going to be using that as we go through the design and delivery of our new venues. But also we've just had the Commonwealth Games down the Gold Coast, and throughout the bid process, the candidature process, we've certainly relied heavily on people that have that experience and worked out how to do it. And we'll be certainly working with them again as we move through this process. Also, there's a real, it's becoming evident that there's a real camaraderie and community of host cities. In fact, there's an organisation of Olympic cities, and a lot of their charter is effectively to pass on and support cities as they move through the design, development and delivery of the Olympic Games. So there's all sorts of support out there, all sorts of information and experience in the private sector, within government, locally, but also through the IOC and other international host cities. We're at the start of the journey, and there's certainly lots of opportunities to get it right, and we'll be relying on all of those partners to help us learn those lessons.
Thanks, Aaron. And a couple of comments there is a perfect segue into the next question, which is from Colin in New South Wales, who will pitch this one to Robbie. So, Robbie, how do you coordinate all that talent that Aaron just talked about? So how do you coordinate working with the designers, state and local government engineers to advance the designs from concept into final designs?
Yeah, very good question, and quite a detailed one. I have an answer for you, Colin. I guess in my experience, and just touching on what Aaron said, at some point the state government will get to a point with all the new infrastructure items that there'll be a reference design. So generally the approach there would be state government would have technical advisors, they'd be building a plan, working to, I guess, what they've won the games on, and that becomes a reference design, similar to any large tunnel or large road project. It's at that time, generally the private sector gets involved and consortiums and consortia take place. They then work through a tender process. In that tender process, generally there's a hell of a lot of meetings with the state government and stakeholders to ensure that we're responding to the reference, and then also creating opportunities and different value opportunities so that, have you thought of this? If we did this, would this be better? Would this be a better outcome for the community? So in relation to the Parklets project, that tender phase went on for around 6 to 9 months. That's usually a hell of a lot of technical meetings. There's financial and economic meetings, and you get to a point where a proponent is awarded, and then the proponent takes carriage of that project to get it to certification and handover, and then you hand it back to the state government for bump-in mode. So generally there's a high level of collaboration. From my experience, it's a great opportunity as an engineer to work with different types of people. And you heard in my presentation, I had the opportunity to work with a fantastic architect, and engineers and architects usually have a bit of tension, but I just learned so much from that project. And I urge any engineers, if they get the opportunity, to put their hand up and give it a go.
Thank you, Robbie. Next, we'll go to Ron. And Ron, the question for you is from Ruben in Queensland. So what impact will the COVID legacy have on the planning of the Olympics?
Thank you, Stacey. Look, I think that's a very valid question, in that the International Olympic Committee wanted to know that as well. So when we did do the update, one of the key considerations was how did the baseline get impacted, or the projections that were previously developed, to reflect the impacts of the COVID pandemic, short and long term. And yes, we've sort of revisited our tourism and trade numbers, but importantly, I think we came back and tried to consider how the broader Queensland Government response to the COVID-19 crisis may potentially help to be a differentiator as we pitch this back to the National Olympic Committee. One of the examples here is that we highlighted Australia's response to the pandemic, the way we reacted and moved hard and moved fast, but also the benefits that result from that. And I suppose the reputational impact that it provides, being a safe nation to come to travel to in a post-COVID environment, just as much as sort of reflecting our capabilities to respond to these shocks in a COVID setting. The other pillars, I suppose, from the broader Queensland Government response to the COVID pandemic very much hold true for the Olympics as well. And I think the Olympics will be a great catalyst to enable the Queensland Government to pursue them. The focus on small to medium-sized businesses, we need to focus on small to medium-sized businesses to help them recover out of the pandemic. And in the games and the supplies that we need to execute such games will particularly be advantageous for a lot of the smaller and medium-sized businesses, particularly located in Queensland. And the reason why I'm sort of highlighting particularly located in Queensland is that one of the underpinning principles there is to really focus and assisting Queensland businesses to thrive and capitalise on the opportunities that the Olympics may present. Yes, these Olympics are probably all Australians will get excited about, but at the end of the day, the bearers of a lot of the costs are the Queensland Government and its games partners, and there will be a desire to reap some of those benefits locally as well. So wherever possible to utilise Queensland businesses, Queensland workforce to assist us also to invest in some of the skills needed to deliver and execute around some of the complex aspects of an Olympics. These skills will stay with us well beyond the Olympics, but the investment is needed now, and there will be a keen desire to invest in a local workforce as much as there will be a need to invest in a national workforce as well. And then the last point, I think, is making sure that we get the balance right between the investment in South East Queensland and not forgetting about the regional parts of Queensland. That is why the emphasis has been that these are really Queensland-wide games. And what you'll see that some of the infrastructure might be residing in South East Queensland, but some of the programming and some of the other investments and legacy benefits that we will experience will accrue to all of us in Queensland or all of us across Australia. If I introduce a new sporting program today to try to capitalise on the opportunity of an Olympics, that sporting program will either have a statewide application or potentially even a national application, depending on who the funder of that particular program is. And as a result, I don't think it is limited to Queensland, but most certainly not limited to South East Queensland only.
Thank you, Ron. Aaron, I'm going to go over to you now with a question that's come from the live environment. There's some question there, if you can delve a bit more into the governance. So can you drive a bit more conversation, a question from Laurie in Queensland, on exactly how the governance is going to work to ensure that the benefits and the outcomes that have been put forward will actually be achieved?
Sure, excellent. Thanks, Stacey. Yes. There's a couple of levels to governance for the Games. Ultimately, the Olympics Organising Committee, as I said in my earlier presentation, their state government is preparing legislation to form the Olympics Organising Committee. The Organising Committee is responsible for putting on the Games, for putting the show on. The Queensland Government and the local councils and our other partners are responsible for getting the stage ready for the event. So the OCOG is responsible for the governance around the temporary overlay and the delivery of the Games itself. A range of people will be on that, and there'll be a lot more conversation about that coming forward when the legislation is presented in the Queensland Parliament. The IOC and the Australian Olympic Committee and the Paralympics Australia have a key role in that and are there every step of the way to make sure that the Games are delivered in a great project, for a great outcome. The OCOG itself has a significant budget to put on the games. So a lot of the cost of the games is borne by the OCOG, raised out of ticket sales and promotional activities and marketing and things. And so there's a big focus from the OCOG on making sure that the games are delivered and are a great spectacle.
Thank you, Aaron. And I might just pass to Ron. So just building on what Aaron was just talking about and where the costs are coming from or who's paying for it. For those online that are interested in delving more into that detail, where can people find the figures that actually represents the costs, the analysis, who's paying, where that information is? Is that something that's available for people to investigate and get a bit more knowledge on?
To understand, so I think Aaron mentioned before, the Queensland Government website has links to the relevant reports, so the KPMG report, but also the venues and the like. The cost of the OCOG budget, at the top level, is certainly being floated around in the public domain. So I think a simple Google search will get you there. The KPMG report will have the benefits in there. As with any report that you do, particularly with such with the amount of confidential information that you have to draw on, there's some information that will not be visible in the public domain. And that is very simple because you do rely on commercial inputs that are provided by other entities that if they were to get into the public domain, you would actually put the Queensland Government, the organising committee at disadvantage. For example, what the value is of future sponsorship rights. That needs to be determined through future tender processes that need to be competitive. So you don't want to put that into the public domain. But on a high level, the overarching costs and the overarching benefits are certainly visible and available in the public domain.
Thank you very much, Ron. Talking legacy, and this might be for Robbie, but happy for anyone to jump in on this one. So with the legacy mode for the Olympic villages and noting that there's a satellite village as well. So is the thought that these will become hotels, long-term accommodation, student accommodation, affordable housing or deluxe housing? That's a question from Scott online.
I can speak from a consultant side, and Aaron, you can jump in from that state government side if you like. Reflecting on the Parklands project for the Commonwealth Games, one of the main winning criteria from the state government on that one was that there was no temporary facilities. There was no containers for bump-in mode. So what was built for the state and the community of the Gold Coast was a facility that was in its ultimate sense. The apartments were fitted out for athletes, and then we put up revised walls. But basically now that is a letting pool for medical staff for the two hospitals within a 500-metre radius, and rooms for Griffith University, which is largely growing, and they have a large medical facility there. So to answer the question, it will come, and subject to what Aaron says, it will come at how the winning bid will come together. But the three villages, you've got a facility at Robina, which is just a growing city in the Gold Coast. You've got Sunshine Coast, which is around an area of future development. And as Aaron touched on, is the bigger village in Brisbane has been well and truly planned for a long time. And we've been working with EDQ on how that and what that might look like in a built form for infrastructure. But what goes there in future and legacy sense will come up to the proponent's bid at that time. Aaron?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Robbie. I think if you think about the North Shore Hamilton development for the Brisbane Olympic Village, yes, there will be a range of accommodation options there, working through with EDQ to work out the right mix to make sure that when the stock is available to market, that it's exactly what the market's looking for. But importantly, it is part of an existing planned development. So it's not something, that we're starting from scratch. It's basically using some of that planned development that's required for a growing city and using that for Olympic accommodation. That's the same thing on the Gold Coast. The Robina city centre or town centre, I think it is. Again, it's a planned environment. This is planned accommodation that will be used. There are going to be options about what it will be used for in legacy mode. But again, it comes down to what the market needs. And again, Sunshine Coast, it's an existing development in the Maroochydore Town Centre that's going gangbusters. Again, we'll be using some of that existing planned infrastructure from an existing development.
Thanks, Aaron. I've got a question straight back to you, actually, Aaron, and it may be quick one to answer. But in terms of the small size stadium, this is a question from Holly. Is that something that IOC had to change its requirements for the sake of legacy?
Yeah, thanks, Holly. I did see that question. I love that stat about the size of our Olympic Stadium. Again, I keep harping on about the new norms. The IOC very much wants to make sure that we use our facilities that we have or facilities that we need for our growing community and not create facilities for just for the games. A 50,000 seat stadium for cricket and AFL is about right for Queensland. We wouldn't fill that on many occasions apart from the Olympics. So 50,000 seats is about the right size. It's part of our candidature. The IOC was well aware of it. It fits in with the new norms about fitting the Olympics into the city, and it was something that was fine by the IOC. It was part of our bid.
Thank you, Aaron. And this one is a bit of a broad one. Interested in everyone's thoughts on this. So Laura has asked online, does Australia have the workforce capacity to deliver all the projects related to the Olympics in time, particularly given the recent Infrastructure Australia market capacity report that came out just in the last week? What does everyone think about capacity?
Sure.
I'll go first. Aaron, you can jump in. Well, Stacey, I attended a roundtable meeting with IELTS last week. We know it's challenging. We know the resourcing in Australia, particularly with the engineering, is tough at the moment. One thing I spoke about is, as engineers, we're very adaptable. I also spoke about in COVID, we all learned how to use our initiative and get the job done and be more broader thinking to collaborate more broadly. So what we need to do, look, it's a task in front of us. That little bump that I spoke about in my slide, there's going to be other bumps in mining and infrastructure at the same time. The reality is it's something as an industry and as a state we've put our hand up and said we're going to do, so we'll get it done. It just creates great opportunity. I know some of the questions there is, what about New South Wales and Melbourne? Well, this is the opportunity to really operate, probably not even just in companies. There might be greater alliances across companies in a consortia to get the job done. So, yeah, hand up. It's going to be a big challenge, but I think we're up for it.
I think Robbie's got it pretty right. Yes, it's going to be a challenge. There are a number of projects, which means that we're not in the same position as somewhere like London or Sydney, where there was one, mega Olympic park. So that helps by allowing different tiers of companies to look at different projects. It is an opportunity, certainly, for the market for jobs in Queensland and Australia, and we'll be working with industry and organisations like Engineers Australia to look at the opportunities and challenges that are come ahead.
We've got time for just a few more questions, and that there's a perfect segue question from that one, and I might move to Ron for that. So the question is from Ed, and he talks about the engagement of small, medium-sized businesses and Indigenous businesses being a great objective, but challenging to manage the know-how and capacity. So what is the plan to ensure that there is authentic, meaningful levels of contribution?
Look, I think that is probably at the appropriate time, best a question asked of the right part of the Queensland government. But the Queensland government is looking at its procurement process, its procurement guidelines, to see how the maximisation of small to medium-sized businesses and Indigenous participation can be ensured from across all activity, I think, that will relate to the Olympics. It will allow us to monitor how successful any such initiatives have been, but also it will allow to deliver on the objective that the Queensland government has put out there. In terms of the broader plan, as Aaron said earlier, and I sort of was about to interject with the previous question as well, we have an 11-year time frame to plan. And I think sometimes it's wiser to slow down in the beginning, get all the right plans in place, which I know the Queensland government and its partners are working on at the moment, and then accelerate. You don't have that benefit usually at other games. And so I think it's a very valid point to sort of go, well, how do we capture the know-how and the capability to make sure it's longer lasting and makes a changes to the communities in which we live. It's probably not there yet, but probably 11 years out might almost be slightly premature, because you need to pace yourself around that 11-year runway is one of the big pieces of advice that we've heard from other Olympic Games organisers, where when you have 7 years, you run hard and you run fast. When you have 11 years, you need to moderate yourself and know when to accelerate. And I think what the Games partners are doing, putting all the plans in place now, or putting that thinking in place to develop those plans, which I'm sure at the appropriate time will be communicated to industry.
And I might take this one as the final question before we wrap up. And there's a bit of a segue there too. Robbie had a great graph on when the engineering might happen and when it will start getting into bump-in zone. So the question from Bryce is, will the works for the Olympics cause a pull forward of future projects leading to a dip in Queensland projects post-2032? Is there a plan post-2032 for the increased workforce? Anyone with any thoughts on the long-term planning?
Governments of all persuasions and at all levels look at ongoing economic activity. 11 years is a long way down the track, but I know that there are parts of government that certainly look at making sure that there's economic activity going forwards. And yes, there's some work in the Olympics. But there's other works that will be going on around. We're in a growing state, and there will be other economic activity going on as well.
Thank you very much, Aaron. So that's pretty much all we have time for today. I do want to recognise that this isn't going to be the last of our sessions on the Olympics. We've got plans in place to run a series of these events, and we're going to focus on different themes throughout them. So the themes of sustainability, transport, security, what else? Manufacturing. There's so many aspects to this game that we can't cover off in one session. So the intent of this was always for this to be quite high level, start the conversation, not end the conversation. So all of the questions that have come through, and there were a lot of questions that came through that we obviously didn't have time for today, will help us in the development of whatever future sessions that we do put on for our engineering community and the broader community. So thank you for all those questions. They will be useful in our planning, and we encourage you to keep thinking of those and thinking of what else you would like to hear from. So please join me once again in thanking Aaron, Ron and Robbie for their time today and their insights that they've shared. I'd like to thank industry partner Cardno for helping make this webinar possible today. As I said, we'd appreciate your feedback on today's program to help improve any future planned sessions. So please complete the short feedback form, which is linked in the description box. And thank you all again for joining us today. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at another session soon. Thanks, everybody.